Hello, travelers. Welcome back to Show and Tell with Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident global citizens. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we are sharing free live stream show and tell events with members of our global community. You can find an updated calendar of live stream events and much more at athome.reachtheworld.org. For today's show and tell, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Julie Koidin. Julie is a musician, an educator, an author, and an 8-time Fulbright scholar. One of her specialties is Brazilian choro music, and she's with us today to discuss the music of Brazil. All of our live stream viewers today are invited to share any questions you may have for Julie using the YouTube chat bar. We've got some students who are joining us live with their questions. It's going to be a great next 30 minutes, and I'm excited to get underway. So without any sort of further ado, welcome to Show and Tell, Dr. Koidin.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. And in fact, when I was really young, probably around 8 or 9 years old, there was a TV show called The Big Blue Marble, which is, of course, the Earth. And at the end of the show, there was a page with an address you could write into and get a pen pal from anywhere in the world. And so I wrote there, and I would write like every week, and I amounted probably 30 different pen pals all over the world. And that, when I was around your age, is when I started my interest in other cultures. And so I think it's just really cool that you guys are watching this series. So I'm really happy to be here. I wanted to talk to you about my Brazilian music journey, as it says here. And I had never been to Brazil. I was, this was maybe 25 years ago or so. I discovered Brazilian music, and I'd like to kind of share my journey with you. This first slide here is the Brazilian flag, and it says order and progress. That's the translation into English. And the colors, the blue, the blue, the yellow, and the green, but particularly the green and the yellow, are reflections of the original Portuguese flags from the royalty, the Portuguese royalty when Brazil was first colonized. It's the only South American country that was colonized by the Portuguese. All the other Central American and South American countries were colonized by the Spanish. And so, of course, they speak Spanish, but Brazil, being the largest country in South America and Central America, speaks Portuguese. So how did I discover Brazilian music? Well, in the mail, actually a connection to Boston. There was a guy in Boston who was selling Brazilian music CDs, and he happened to send me this one. And on it were these two guys, Altamiro Carrilho and Carlos Poyares, who were the two foremost musicians in the style of choro. Now, you've probably never heard of choro. Maybe you've heard of churro, which are those really sweet, long donuts that they sell on the streets, but they're nothing to do with it. And I'm also a flutist, and you'll see that in a little bit. And so when I heard these two amazing musicians, I instantly fell in love. So I wanted to share the very first thing that I heard. So imagine you're me, you're sitting home in your living room, and you hear this on your CD player. Okay, that's just a little taste. And just a little side note about the Portuguese language. I had studied Spanish for a long time, and I learned Portuguese before my first trip. And my favorite letter in Portuguese is the X. And the X is called X. And so this is the name of the composer, Pixinguinha. It makes this really beautiful sh sound. And I took this picture in the capital of Brazil called Brasilia. And so they have these signs out for lunch, and they call a cheeseburger. This is, with an X burger, but the letter is called cheese in Portuguese. So it's cheeseburger. So that's just a little kind of fun thing about Portuguese. All right. Now, some of you may have heard already about samba. That's kind of the most familiar Brazilian export. So there was a Disney.
To infinity!
Oh, no. Commercial.
And beyond!
There's a snake in my boot!
Look what I made!
So back in the 1940s, there was this Disney movie that was a tour all over Brazil, all over South America. And part of it was to Brazil. So here's a little cartoon.
Brasil, é o Brasil brasileiro, é o mulato insoneiro, vou cantar-te nos meus versos. O Brasil samba que dá bamboleio, que faz gingar. O Brasil do meu amor, terra de Nosso Senhor. Brasil, Brasil, pra mim, pra mim. Oh, esse coqueiro que dá coco, oi, onde amarro a minha rede, nas noites claras de luar.
That's my favorite part, is the singing flowers. And you can still watch this movie. It's on YouTube. So it's a Disney film all about South America. So that's the samba that you heard in the background. And you may have heard music like that. Another really famous type of music in Brazil is called bossa nova. And that came out in around 1959. And it made its way here to the US. And the girl from Ipanema, and that happens, this picture is the girl from Ipanema after she grew up. And this beach that she's walking on is the Ipanema beach. This is a really famous tune. Let's hear this one. Hopefully there's no.
Young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, each one she passes goes.
So it's such a shame we can't listen to the whole thing, but so some of you may have heard that, and that's a bossa nova was adopted by jazz musicians very easily. And so again, that came out in like the middle of the 1900s. Samba came around the 1920s. But what preceded both of them as a unique Brazilian music was choro. And it actually came out in like the end of the 1800s. And it was the 1940s when this woman named Carmen Miranda made a big hit in the movies. And she actually wasn't Brazilian at all. She was from Portugal. And if you've ever had a banana, a Chiquita banana, that's her image right there. In fact, there was a song about bananas, and so she did that song. But we're going to listen to one of the most famous choros called Tico Tico no Fubá.
He sure took a lot of persuading. At least 3 seconds.
Faz um favor, tira esse bicho do celeiro, que ele acaba comendo o fubá inteiro. Tira esse tipo de gato em cima do meu fubá. Tanta coisa que ele pode pinicar. Eu já fiz tudo para ver se conseguia fazer alpiste para ver se ele comia. Botei um gato, um espantalhinho, um sapão, mas ele acha que fubá é que é boa alimentação.
So what you just heard is a choro. And many choros are really fast, just like that one, but some of them are slow. And I'm just going to get a little better in the mood here and put on my fruit hat, just like Carmen Miranda. All right, so here is Brazil, and you can see it's gigantic. And choro first came out here in Rio de Janeiro, okay, which is considered the southeast of the country. And just like jazz here in the United States, jazz is all over. You can go to Montana and hear jazz. You can hear jazz, of course, in the major cities of jazz like Chicago and New York. But choro is known all over Brazil. And I started my research pretty much in Rio, and then I started going up north. And my goal in my career is to go all over Brazil and research how this music is played in the various regions. And my favorite city by far, it was my first city that I came to, is Rio de Janeiro. And it's so beautiful. It's got mountains right in the city. You can see it's so close to the beach. So if you're a person who likes mountains and you can't decide mountains or beach, you can have both of those things in Rio. Now, kind of interestingly, Brazil had 3 capitals, and Rio is the second. The current capital is in Brasilia, which is right here in the middle of the country. The first capital is Salvador, then Rio, and then Brasilia. And if you recall, I played you that first tune with Altamiro Carrilho, the one that I heard on the CD player. And what ended up happening, it's a very long story, but let's just say I happened to meet someone who personally knew him. And in 1997, arranged for me to go there and meet my musical idol. And you can see that this is me and that's him. And I called him my Brazilian father. Just wanted to show you a little bit of his playing. If you notice, if any of you are familiar with a guitar, most guitars that you see here in the US have 6 strings, and this one has 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's a very special instrument that's used in Brazil and in choro. All right. So what is choro? Well, just like all musics throughout the Americas, all popular musics, including our very own jazz, they were all a development that occurred from the mixing of cultures, from colonial times of the Europeans that came to settle the Americas. Some musics had some indigenous influences, choro not so much, but indigenous, like the native peoples who lived there in the Americas. And then, of course, the African slaves that were brought over by the Europeans. And Brazil, unfortunately, had the largest slave trade in all of the Americas and was one of the last to end their slave trade. Choro has African and European influences, just like jazz does, just like tango in Argentina and salsa in Puerto Rico and so forth. And I mentioned it started in the end of the 1800s as a way of playing European music, and then it later developed into a style in its own. And it was mainly instrumental, but vocal music was added when radio hit the scene, which was in Brazil. It was in 1922, was the first radio broadcast. And so they found that when people sang, it was easier to listen to when you can't see the group. So some of the shoro songs that were all instruments had voice that was added later to them.
Dr. Koidin, pardon the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you're about 15 minutes in.
Okay, great. We're actually almost at the end, so that works out great. This is called a Hodaji Shoro, and this is, or translates as Wheel of Shoro, and it's very informal, and the musicians sit around a table. Now, wouldn't that be an awesome way of eating dinner? Like truly awesome. So yeah, that's how Brazilians do it. That's why I love it so much. Oops, here we go. Wanted to show you, this is, I've played many TV shows, but this is one that I could. Very coincidentally, I'm wearing the same shirt and necklace. Wasn't planned. So they're dressed kind of like an old-time shoro group. So that was in Natal. And they have schools of shoro. This one's in Rio. Skip over here. There's not a good shot here, but there's literally hundreds of musicians playing at the same time. And I've participated in some of these things. And here we go. So this here is a picture of my shoro school here in Chicago. This was several years ago, and this was held at a community music school. And it's a Hodaji Shoro, and symbolically we have a table in the middle of the room. And this is our website, chicagoshoroclub.com. You can go there. And they're springing up all over the place internationally. I've been to the one in Germany, France, Spain, whenever I travel, I find a shoro club and I play with them. And they're called Clubes de Shoro. And that's the end of my presentation. And ciao is how you say goodbye. And obrigada, if you're a girl, you say obrigada, and that means thank you. And if you're a boy, you say obrigado with an O at the end, and that means thank you.
Right.
So that's all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koidin. What a fascinating topic, and I can tell you love it just by the way that you can't sit still when you hear the music. And I feel like a lot of us who are watching felt the same way. You hear that music and you have to move a little bit. I am really excited. We have a great group of on-camera students who are ready to ask you some questions. We have PS1 joining us from Brooklyn today. Hey, PS1, thanks for joining us. I'm gonna sort of ask you maybe to bring out, come out of your presentation view if you could. And I will bring Jack into the conversation. Jack, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask Dr. Koidin your question.
Okay. So, did you meet anyone important while you traveled?
Oh, yes. Well, Altamiro Carrillo was really, really famous. And one time we were in Sao Paulo looking for, he was really cold. It was around 60 degrees out. And I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he was wearing a coat. And he said, I'm so cold, I'm so cold. And he says, will you come with me to buy a hat? So I went with him to buy a hat, and people started coming up to us and shaking his hand, and they were talking to him like they knew him. And I said, Altamiro, do you know, wow, you've got so many friends. He goes, oh, I don't know any of them. These are just fans of mine. So yeah, I met a lot of really famous musicians when I was there.
Very cool. Great question, Jack. Thank you. Malik, over to you, bud. What's your question today?
When you were in Scandinavia in Serbia, what research did you conduct there?
Well, whenever I go to a different country, I try to meet composers that are really important in that country, and then as I'm a flutist, I try to ask them if they have compositions for flute, and hopefully they say yes. And then they give me copies of their music, and then I bring them back for my students. And then what I would do is I'd give them to my different students, they'd learn them, and then we'd have a concert of that music. And I, in turn, brought music from here in the United States, and I gave to their students. So we did kind of like this exchange of music. When I was in New Zealand, they have their own kind of music by the Maori people. And so I did a little bit of research of how they make music, and they have completely different instruments. And so I brought some of these back with me too. So I'm just interested in the native music of each of the countries. And I collect the flutes from all over the place. So in Serbia, I have a Serbian flute, and I have a Swedish flute, and I have a Norwegian flute, and it's really cool.
Very cool. What a great way to incorporate a passion into sort of a larger global context too. It's, it sounds like this music has spread all over the world. Great question, Malik. We have some wonderful questions being funneled to us through the live stream from Miss Mesk and her students in Brooklyn, and they were really interested in your language, how if you do in fact speak Portuguese, how that helps you with your music, and whether or not you have any family connection to Brazil.
Well, I'll start with the last part. In 2008, so 11 years after I was already going to Brazil all the time, and by the way, I've been there 23 times. Last year was my 23rd time since 97. Some remote family member sent my parents a book of that she was doing research on family ties. And I was looking through it, and I saw an email that said .com.br, and I got all excited. And I tried to email that person, and no one wrote back, and met someone, and they said, oh, there's a Brazilian white pages you can go to. So long story short, I called that person, and she was a close cousin of mine, my father's father. So my grandfather's brother went to Brazil, and so she's the great granddaughter of that person, and we were about the same age, and we hit it off. It was amazing. And so yes, I now have family in Brazil that I know of, and they had come to the United States. They had tried to come to the United States at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, and they weren't allowed in, and so they went to Brazil. In terms of Portuguese, I started learning it 6 months before I met Altamiro, and I was studying privately. It was very hard to find Portuguese classes. In fact, there weren't any in Chicago. And so I was just studying privately in someone's kitchen. And I went down there, and when you're in a place that speaks a different language, you kind of learn by being in that situation. And so, yes, I speak Portuguese, and I teach in Portuguese, and falo português.
Fantastic. Thanks for the great questions, Ms. Mesk students. I want to come back to Jack. If you have another question you want to ask Dr. Koidin, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it.
What inspired you to play the flute?
Well, when I was a really little girl, like maybe 5 or 6 years old, I had these storybooks that had recordings that went with them, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears and so forth. And there's one that was Peter and the Wolf. And Peter and the Wolf is a piece for orchestra that's narrated, and the bird was the flute. And I heard the flute and I instantly fell in love with that sound. And then later on, and you guys can, if you guys know Nickelodeon, there was a show called HR Puffin Stuff a long, long time ago. And it was a live action animated show. It's very interesting. If you can find it on YouTube. And there was a character called Freddie the Flute, and he was a talking flute. He was a magical talking flute, and I really wanted a Freddie the Flute. So both of these things added to me wanting to play the flute, besides a band called Jethro Tull.
Oh, I love Peter and the Wolf. That's such a good recommendation for any student who's watching who hasn't seen it or listened to it, I should say. You should check it out. Jack, thanks for the awesome question. Malik, your turn. Go ahead.
What advice would you give to children that want to become musicians?
Well, first of all, if you become a musician, a friend of mine, a fellow musician, says to me, I might not be rich in dollars, but music has made my life rich in experience and with communicating with people, because you don't have to speak the same language in terms of language, because music is a universal language. And so I would say that you should pick out an instrument that you absolutely love, and each day should be a new experience in terms of practicing it. That practice shouldn't be a labor, but practice should be finding new things you can do with the instrument and finding recordings you really like, because that's how I started. I loved the recordings, and so I took my flute and I just tried to figure out what they were doing in the recording, trying to do it by ear. But I would just say, keep it up and maybe find a teacher who can help guide you, and listen to that teacher and find a music you love, and then just keep going. It will be a lifetime, whether you do it as a living or whether you do it as a hobby. It will be something that is so special to us as human beings in terms of communicating. So it's something, unless you play a musical instrument, it's a completely unique form of communication.
Great question, Malik. And I know you're becoming an increasingly global citizen too, like a lot of our Reach the World viewers. It seems to be a great way to get exposed to different cultures and even travel the world as well.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, passing along a message from Tahina at PS1 in Brooklyn. She says you did a great job in your presentation, Dr. Koidin. She, like a couple other live stream viewers, would like to know what your favorite place to visit is and why.
Brazil. Even though I've traveled almost the world, whenever I go to a different country, I always compare it to Brazil. So I absolutely love Brazil. But last year I went to Colombia, and I fell in love with Colombia. I just thought it was amazing. So which was my favorite place? And what was the other part of the question?
And why? Why do you like it so much?
Well, okay, music. The people are so warm and friendly. They hug and kiss you when they meet you. Of course, not now, but I just found like they're just so inviting. Like a complete stranger would invite me to their house for dinner, and here we might think that's a little strange, but there you go for it. And you go and you meet the family and you sit around and you play music. Almost everyone in Brazil has some music in their background. Like it's music is part of their culture. When they have family gatherings, someone always breaks out a guitar and there's dancing. And I just love the musical aspect of the culture. People don't need to be professionals. They're amateurs that just, amateur means to love something. And so you feel that love.
Great. One of our live stream viewers wants to know if you just solely focus on the flute or if you play other instruments as well.
I solely focus on the flute, but during this time of quarantine, I have started learning the bass ukulele.
All right.
Because I'd like to be in a rock band at some point.
Awesome. Great. Why don't we loop back in Jack? Jack, do you have another question you'd like to ask Dr. Koidin?
Yes. Actually, I have two. One, what kind of instruments do you teach?
Well, I teach flute, of course, but I also work with a group of students. It's called the Ravinia Festival. It's a very famous festival here in Chicago. Like you guys have Tanglewood in Boston. We have Ravinia where the Chicago Symphony plays. And they have an educational program which is based on the Venezuelan El Sistema educational system. And there I work with students who play all sorts of instruments. So I'm kind of like a band teacher in a way. And I've learned, a few months ago, I learned the positions of the trombone. Never in my life have I played trombone, knew anything about trombone. And so sometimes I have to dabble in other instruments, but my primary instrument to teach is the flute. And I also teach about Brazilian music, like where people are not musicians. And I also teach a music appreciation class.
Okay.
Was there a second question?
Yep. Oh, yep. Sorry, Jack, you had a second question.
Well, actually, it's not exactly a question. I just find it fascinating that you do the bass ukulele because I have a ukulele myself and I play it.
Oh,
So.
Neat. Yeah, you should check out the bass ukulele because it sounds just like a big bass, but it's really tiny. And I call the strings linguini strings because they're really fat. And I have teeny little hands. And so I've tried to play guitar and bass, and it hurts my hands because they're used to being like this. And the bass ukulele is a really comfortable instrument to play. Highly recommend it.
Very great question, Jack. Thank you. Malik, let's get you on for a last question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so were you ever in a band of some sort?
Oh yeah. So I play choro, and I guess you could call it a band. You know, I play in a Brazilian music group. Yep. And I played in all sorts. I actually played once in an Iranian band, and talk about not speaking the language. They came from Iran, and I didn't understand a word they said. I just heard my name, and that's how I knew how to come on the stage. And I played in a rock band, and they were kind of like the Bruce Springsteen, if you've ever heard of him. They were really popular at the time, you know, or like Lady Gaga kind of deal. And so I played in that group, just for like a weekend.
Awesome. Fantastic questions, all of you. I have one question for you, Dr. Koidin. It was very striking to me how the moment the music started, you just started moving, and it seems like this music is largely made for movement and dancing. It's kind of hard to talk about this music without talking about how it impacts dance and maybe even some of the things people wear traditionally while listening or participating in different forms of Brazilian music. Are there any things that come to mind? I know samba is its own dance form, but is there any dance associated with choro?
Yeah, there's actually a choro dance, sure. And there's another dance, there's another style that's close to choro, which is called machixe, which is two X's in that one, shishi, machixe. And machixe came to the United States first, before Carmen Miranda. And so it kind of came in the early part of the 1900s. And it's a couples dance. And you kind of dance it a little like tango, except it goes faster, I guess you could say. So yes, there's the choro dance and there's the machixe. And choro dancing is very gymnastic. It has the guy holding up the woman and twirling her around and so forth. So yeah, you can look up choro dancing on YouTube. That was a slide, but I took it out because of the time.
Oh, well, before I ask you my final question, would you, now that you're in full screen, can you show us your hat again that you had put on during the presentation? You were kind of small at the time, and it's worth taking another look at that.
So I made this hat. This was my first band, Malik. It was called the Mirandas after Carmen Miranda, and none of us knew what we were doing because it was before my first trip to Brazil. We formed in 1995. And the guitarist of the band sent me, I received a box of fake fruit in the mail. And he says, I'm sending this to you because I want you to make a hat. So I went out and this hat, it's a basket hat, kind of made out of whatever. And I cut off the rim. It was a kind of like a sombrero kind of hat. So I cut off the rim, and then I took a glue gun and I glued all this fruit here. My favorite is the banana, of course. And so that's my Carmen Miranda hat.
It's fantastic.
For the Mirandas.
Very cool. Well, we ask all of our guests before we let them go in show and tell, after you are released from COVID-19 stuck in place mode, what will be your next adventure? Will you be going back to Brazil, I assume?
No. My next adventure is I'm going to Austin, Texas. I've never been to Austin, Texas. I have a friend in Austin, Texas, and I'm going to meet some musicians there. And I'm also on my way to another Fulbright. I'm hoping to return to Ecuador. I taught in Ecuador, and they're inviting me back. So, right. And then Switzerland. A student in Brazil from Switzerland came to study with me, and she invited me to Switzerland. So I was supposed to go to Switzerland and Ecuador this summer. So
fantastic. I hope you get there.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Koidin. This was so fascinating, excuse me, to talk to you today. Great questions from our on-camera participants today and our great live stream audience. Really want to thank you all for joining us and going on this journey through Brazilian music. You're invited to join our last remaining live stream for this week. This afternoon, we're going to be going to Madrid, Spain, which is a very good way to end the week. And I hope you're all getting ready for Oceans Week 2, which is coming up in about a week and a half. So you can find a complete listing of upcoming Reach the World live stream events at athome.reachtheworld.org. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Dr. Koidin.
Obrigada. And then you say obrigado.
All right, why don't I'll unmute our participants and we can give them a chance. Actually, you guys might need to unmute yourselves. Sorry.
Obrigado.
Perfect.
Obrigado.
Perfect.
Perfect. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.